to the Unlock a Life You Love podcast. My name's Dr. Tim Teel. I am the Doc of Unlock, and we're here to help you unlock flourishing good health and expansive emotional well being with the Unlock a Life You Love podcast. And today's going to be a little bit of a soliloquy. I wanted to just stop and do a little recap on some of the fantastic guests that we have had here on the podcast and kind of give you a summary of what it is that all of them are doing and give some insight into how you can implement some of the things that they have been talking about here on the podcast in your own life. And what I want to do is talk about language today. That may seem like a weird topic to be talking about on a Unlock a Life You Love podcast. But the key, the real key to unlocking some of the miracles and the magic that many of our guests on here have been talking about is understanding language and learning to manipulate language. When we're going through school, one of the most powerful things that we learn to do is to read and to write language. And most of you probably believe that you only speak one or two languages, maybe three, maybe four. But I'm willing to bet there's maybe one more language that you haven't considered that you actually speak and understand. And I'd like to introduce that concept to you today and then tell you some stories about what happens when we address people as spiritual, energetic, emotional beings by talking the language that is the primary language of the human body. What is that, you think? So, what is the first thing that happens the second that we're all born? What does every baby do? They cry, right? At least the healthy ones do. They all cry. So, I have a question to ask you. Who taught that baby how to cry? It's probably the most important question that we'll ask in this podcast, at least for quite some time anyway, is who taught a baby how to cry? If you've never pondered that question, it changes your life. It changed mine tremendously once I kind of came to the conclusion, oh my gosh, nobody taught the baby how to cry. Nobody taught a baby how to cry. Nobody taught a baby how to cry. Think about that for a second. How does the baby know how to cry? And how does every human baby know how to cry? How is that? We see so many of these things so frequently, and so often we just take it for granted. But if you really stop and ask the question about how does a baby know how to cry, the answer becomes fairly obvious. There's a program. There's a program that runs in every single human being, and it's all the same program. Crying, laughing, shock, anger, fear, excitement, anxiety, all of these emotions are expressed in every single culture on the planet. Everybody who speaks a language also speaks the language of emotion. Emotion may seem a little oversimplified, doesn't it? But let me tell you some stories about what happens when we understand the language, the patterns, the rules, and the characteristics of the language of emotion. Because when you learn this, it will completely and utterly change your life. It did mine. It destroyed 20 years of my life in medicine once I understood the power of emotions and what happens when we align ourselves correctly with the language of emotions. And so, what I want to do today is tell you some stories about what happened in my practice when I started addressing people as emotional, energetic, spiritual beings and the stories that they shared with me about what happened with them when they addressed themselves as emotional, energetic, spiritual beings. And then I want to explain to you just a little bit about what I think is going on and what some of those rules, patterns, and characteristics are of the language of emotion, and how you can implement those things in your own life right away and change it immediately. immensely, powerfully, and really fast when you understand some of the rules, patterns, and characteristics of the language of emotion. So come along with me. I want to tell you a few stories about patients that I encountered. The first one blew my mind. In 2020, just before the pandemic hit, I had this old guy in my clinic who was complaining about a cough that wouldn't go away, feeling like he had something stuck in his throat all the time and a voice that didn't work right. He was hoarse from time to time. And those are all really concerning things. And so we put a camera down this guy's throat, and I'm talking to him while we're doing the examination. And I asked him, I said, "Listen, this is usually not a big deal. I put the camera up on the computer screen so he could see it, and there was a little bit of a nodule on one of his vocal folds. I said, that doesn't really bother me that bad, but given your history, sir, I mean, it's begging for a biopsy." You see, he had put on his paperwork that he had a history of cancer, but he didn't tell me what kind of cancer that he had. And I said, "What did you have anyway?" And he said, "I had esophageal cancer." And I said, When?" I mean, that's like a big deal. And he said, "Which time?" And I said, "You had it more than once?" He said, "Yeah, they cut it out of me and it came right back a couple of months later." And I said, "Well, it has a bad tendency to do that, but are you like on hospice or something? Because, those patients don't live a long time." And he said, "No," he said, "this was 35 years ago." I said, "Come again?" He said, "You heard me correctly." He said, "It was 35 years ago." And I said, "With all due respect, you realize you've been dead for like 34 years, right?" He laughed and he said, "Yeah, I know." See, at the time I was working as a board certified ear, nose, and throat physician, and I know or at least thought I understood the characteristics of esophageal cancer and the statistics that are associated with recurrent esophageal cancer. And let me tell you something. There isn't anybody that survives 35 years. The average lifespan for recurrent esophageal cancer is 10.8 months, not years, months. And here's this clown sitting in my office 35 years after his diagnosis. I said, "Sir, you realize we don't even have statistics to describe you. I mean, you left the statistics in the dirt like 30 years ago." He said, "Yeah, I know." And I was unbelievably confused. And I thought about it for a second. I said, "You did something, didn't you?" And he said, "Yeah, I did." I said, "What did you do?" He said, "You realize you're the only physician in 35 years that ever asked me that question, right?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Everybody else just kind of took credit for curing my cancer." And I said, "Well, that's kind of what we do, but recurrent esophageal cancer just doesn't act like this. I mean, you may find somebody that lives a year, maybe two, maybe five on the outside, but that's crazy." I said, 35 years? No chance. I said, "There's something else going on here." I said, I'd like to hear your story." He said, "Well, I'll tell you." He said, "I made a decision." I said, "What was the decision?" He said, "I decided not to fight cancer." And I said, "Well, that's weird. Everybody fights cancer." And he said, "Yeah, I know." But he said, "I just made a different decision." I said, "Why?" He said, "Well, it's really quite simple." He said, "Close your eyes and imagine something for me." I'm like, "Okay, okay, what?" And he said, "Close your eyes and imagine yourself sitting alone in a room, and the door opens, a guy walks into the room, he turns around, he looks at you, he closes the door behind him, and you realize in that moment that you're going to have a fight with a guy." And I said, "Oh, this is awful." He said, "Yeah, it is." He said, "But," he said, "think about it for just a second." And he said, "Answer me one question." He said, "Did the guy get bigger or did he get smaller?" So I'd encourage you to do the same thing. Close your eyes and tell me, if you're going to have a fight with somebody, imagine, did they get bigger or did they get smaller? And I closed my eyes and I thought about it for a second. I said, "Oh my gosh, he got bigger." He said, "Yeah, that's right." He said, "No," he said, "They always get bigger." He said, "I decided I didn't want my cancer to get bigger, so I decided not to fight." I said, "Well, wow, that's an interesting thought." I said, "Is that all you did?" He said, "No." I said, "Well, what else did you do?" And he said, "Well, I I made another decision. I said, what's that? He said, when they cut it out of me and it came right back after a couple of months, he said, I pretty much knew that was going to be the end of me. And he said, so I just decided to accept the fact that this was going to end my life, um, make a widow out of my wife, orphans out of my children, and take me away from the work that I loved. I just accepted that fact. And I said, sounds like you gave up. And he said, no. He said, I didn't say I accept this and I'm just going to have to put up with it or I'm going to be mad about it or I'm going to be disappointed. He said, I just decided to accept the fact that this was going to kill me. And he said, something really fascinating happened the second that I made that decision. And I said, what's that? He said, there was a sense of peace that set over my entire body. He said, I could feel it set in from head to toe. And he said, it was the most wonderful thing and the most peaceful, loving, kind, just peaceful thing that happened to me the second that I decided to accept that diagnosis as mine. I said, fascinating. Is that all you did? And he said, no, no, it's not. I said, well, what else did you do? And he said, well, I don't tell a lot of people about what else I did because I didn't want them to think I was weird. And I said, what do you care if people think you're weird, Chief? And he said, well, said I was a pastor for 40 years. And he said, quite unfortunately, what people think matters. And so I didn't tell a lot of people about it. And I said, okay, fair enough. But I'm just dying of curiosity here. What else did you do? And he said, well, he said, I sat down in a chair 2 or 3 or 4 times a day whenever I had the chance to stop and think about it. And he said, I closed my eyes and I imagined sending that cancer love. And I said, you, that's it? He said, that's it for 35 years. He said, I still do it today. I said, you sat down in a chair, you closed your eyes, and you imagined sending it love. He said, yep. And I just thought to myself, unsurprisingly, this is a pastor expressing the ultimate expression of love your enemy. Must be powerful counsel. He said, well, it's what I did. And I was amazed. I will tell you that over and over again, I have applied his 3 step formula to my own life with unbelievable results. In fact, if I told you all of the things that I did with this 3 step process, you would call me a liar. Unfortunately, I didn't take pictures of my body when I was using his protocol, but I can assure you, if you will stop and do these 3 steps, decide not to fight. Don't resist whatever is happening in your life. Accept it as it is without giving up. Just simply accept it as here. And then imagine sending whatever it is that you'd like to have in your life, love, and everything you don't want in your life, love. It is amazingly powerful, and we'll talk more about that at the end of this podcast because I've already put some resources together for you guys to take advantage of and practice this in your own life. It will turn your life upside down and help you to create your own miracles wherever you want to create them. So the second patient that absolutely changed my life was a guy that I had no idea when he came in was going to have a miracle right there in my office, a miracle, if you will. Miracles are something, miracles and magic, I think, are 2 words that we use to describe something that we saw, we experienced, and it's beyond our ability to reason or explain the mechanism of what just happened. And I don't believe these things are miracles anymore. I don't believe that that what happened with my old guy with the esophageal cancer was a miracle. I believe it was a practical application of the understanding of emotional energy. And I believe that the world is ready to hear these stories now. In fact, I think the world is hungry to hear how we can transform our lives and how unbelievably powerful we are. So the second guy that that came into my office and had a miracle happen was a dude about my age, and he had some hearing loss problems, and we always look at everybody's ears and up their nose and in their mouth and all the rest of that stuff. It's what I do. All right. So I looked in this guy's ears and I pulled out a little popsicle stick to look in his mouth. I turned my light on and I held that popsicle stick up, and immediately this guy starts yelling and screaming and gagging and sweating. And he turned red and his face just wrinkled up, and he had his hands above his head and just started gagging like I thought the guy was going to puke right there in my office. And I thought, what in the, I mean, he went nuts. And just immediately, like somebody had flipped the light switch on in this guy. And I immediately threw the stick away and I said, whoa, hold on. I don't know what's going on, but we're not going to do this. I said, I'm not going to look. I'm not going to. I just threw the stick away, and it took him a few seconds to kind of calm down. And I said, I don't know what just happened, but I'm sorry if I've triggered something here. And I mean, something got triggered in that guy that was unbelievable. So after I gave him a second to kind of calm down, I walked both he and his wife down to my hearing aid booth, and I put him in the booth, and his wife stayed with me in the control side of all this. And as I'm doing his hearing test, I kind of lean over and talk to his wife, and I said, "What's up with that gagging thing?" And she said, "Doc, if he had known that you were going to try and look in his mouth today, he never would have come." And I said, "Why?" She said, "He was abused when he was a kid, and his response to everything was to gag. If he gagged hard enough and long enough, they would just leave him alone." Ah, she said, "It is, and every time he gets stressed out, he gets upset, he starts gagging to the point where he just can't even function." In fact, she said one time he was in a road rage incident and got so upset he pulled off the side of the road and gagged on the side of the road for 25 minutes. It was so debilitating for this guy. And I said, for crying out loud, has he ever gotten any help? She said he has been in cognitive behavioral therapy for 40 years, 40 years, and made zero progress. Nothing, nothing has touched this. And I said, you reckon he'd work with me for just a second? Because I had just recently learned about emotional freedom technique tapping. And she said, he will try anything. I said, okay, great. So we went over his hearing test. I said, there's nothing to do right now. We just need to keep an eye on things. But I said, talk to me about that gagging thing. And he said, well, doc, he said, I was abused when I was a kid. He said, I know, I'm aware of it. I've been in cognitive behavioral therapy for years and years and years. We have made zero progress with this gagging thing. And I said, would you think you want to get rid of this thing? And he said, yeah. He said, I'd do anything. And I said, do me a favor. I said, start banging your hands together like this. Just bang the pinky sides of your hands together and just say what I tell you to say. And he said, okay. So he starts banging his hands together, pinky side to pinky side. And I said, just try this. I said, just say, despite my gagging, I'm okay. He said, despite my gagging, I'm okay. He keeps banging his hands together. I said, say, despite my gagging, I love and accept myself. He said, despite my gagging, I love and accept myself. I said, now bang on top of your head, just right on the very vertex of your scalp, and say the same thing. Say, despite my gagging, I'm okay. He said, despite my gagging, I'm okay. And I said, say, despite my gagging, I love and accept myself. He said, despite my gagging, I love and accept myself. And we went through all of the different tapping points, like 10 or 11 tapping points that we did. And we did them all a second time. About halfway through, he starts to giggle a little bit and he says, what in the world are we doing? And I said, keep laughing, boss. I think you might be winning. And he said, okay. So we just kept tapping. And it took us about 2 minutes to go through all the tapping points twice. And I said, take a big deep breath for me. He took a big deep breath. He blew it out. I said, take another great big one. He said, okay. He blew it out. We just kind of sat there and looked at one another for a little bit. And he said, what are we doing? And I said, I think we're just waiting for the energy to kind of dissipate. He said, what energy? I said, the energy that's you. He said, okay. I said, how you feeling? He said, no different, really, I guess. And I said, okay. So I rolled over to my desk and I opened the drawer and I pulled out a tongue blade and I held it up and I said, how you doing, Hoss? And he just looked at me and he said, well, that's kind of weird. I'm okay. And I scooted my little chair over there and I said, open your mouth for me. And he did. I put that tongue blade on his, on his tongue and I said, how you doing now? He said, I'm okay, though. I said, hmm, isn't that interesting? He said, yep. And so I stuck that tongue blade all the way on the back of his tongue and I pushed down really hard. And I said, how you doing that? I was pushing hard enough on that stick that it started to crack, and I did it on purpose because that's how we suppress someone's gag reflex. And he said, uh, okay, Doc. I said, cool. And I threw that stick in the trash, and his wife was sitting on my left side, and she literally fell out of her chair, caught herself about halfway to the floor, and she said, "What in the world is this?" She said, "I've been going to church for a long time, and I have never seen a miracle like that." She said, "What in the world did you just do?" And I said, "I didn't do anything. I taught him how to use his body as a way to modulate his emotions. And this is one of the keys. This is no, this is how we unlock a life you love, guys. This is the reason that I stepped away from medicine when I saw these things happening. I said, "You've got to be kidding me. We can powerfully and rapidly rewrite the emotional program that we have stuck inside of every single one of us." You see, this man as a child experienced some horrible traumatic event over and over and over again. And there were two pieces of information that he was subjected to. One was the information of what was happening, the objective things that were happening to him. And the second thing that he experienced was the emotion of experiencing those things. Okay, so there were two things that were happening. When we experience information and emotion together, that's how we aggregate long-term memories. This is how we affect what we store and what we pass on. If you are 25 or 30 years old, you probably remember September 11th, 2001. All right. Why do you remember where you were at and what you were doing and who was around you? You might even remember what you had for breakfast that day or lunch that day or what you were doing and where you were at. But I'll bet you can't remember what you were doing September 11th of last year or the year before. But you can go back over 20 years in your memory to September 11th, 2001, and know exactly what it is that you were doing. Why? Why? It's because there was emotion that was attached to the information, and you remember it drove it into your long term memory. Without emotion being attached to information, we don't aggregate that long term information or that information on a long term basis. I was introduced to this tapping thing in 2020 when all of us were stressed out and everybody didn't know what was going on. And we thought the world was coming to an end and the Black Death was going to get us all. And I had just started a brand new practice in a brand new place. And I was certain that this was going to destroy my practice. And it hurt it badly for a very long time, like it did a lot of other people. And so I found tapping and used it on myself. And as I learned, as I experienced emotional relief changes to stress and anxiety and worry and anger. And I mean, all of a sudden, we could just rapidly start turning some of this stuff loose. And it was a fantastic experience. I was amazed at the changes that happened. And if you want to hear more of those stories, you can go listen to our program on emotional freedom technique tapping. That's a free program on my website. You can just go and sign up for it and listen to those stories. They're fantastic. Listen, I have to tell you one more story before we end today because I told everybody we try and keep these podcast sessions to 30 minutes or so so that we could tell the story and get on with life. But the third patient that absolutely utterly changed my life was a young lady who came to my office with what we call paradoxical vocal fold motion, and when she was breathing in her vocal folds, instead of going apart and allowing air to come into her trachea and subsequently into her lungs, and when we breathe in, they're supposed to go apart, and when we exhale, they come together just a little bit to control the speed at which we exhale air. So when we take a breath in, they're supposed to go apart. And yet, when she was taking a breath in, they were closing up, and she was trying to suck air through a closed glottis, and it sounded horrible. And the more upset she got, the worse the problem would get. And that's a fairly typical pattern. Anytime we see paradoxic vocal fold motion, it's always an emotional problem. So this was an easy diagnosis. But what was so fascinating was the tremendous response that she had once we identified and she was able to release the information or the emotion that was attached to the information. So I asked her, I said, no, I said, have you ever been choked? And she did this. She just dropped her head and looked at the ground. And I said, are you able to talk about it? And she shook her head, no. And no, what no, what we tried to do was some tapping, didn't work. We even tried a little hypnosis in my office, didn't work. Nothing would touch it. No, she would get about 2 minutes worth of release, and no, and then it would come right back. I even tried to get her to laugh and tap and all this stuff all at the same time, and we'd get about 2 minutes of normal breathing, and then it would come right back. But I told her, I said, listen, unquestionably, this is an emotional problem, and so she thought about it, and she went back home and worked on it for several months, and I never saw her again. And one day in the mail, I get a letter from this young lady, and she said, Doc, she said, I just wanted to tell you that you were absolutely right about the diagnosis, but I wasn't able to talk about what had happened. She said what had happened was she had been assaulted and choked by a fellow that she was dating, and had been molested, assaulted, and choked simultaneously. And that was the day that all of that started. And she went to work with her pastor, and finally came to the conclusion that it was time to forgive this man. And in her heart and in her mind, the second that she forgave that man for doing what he had done to her, the breathing problem went away that very moment. And it demonstrated to me for the third time how miracles can happen when we address ourselves as emotional, spiritual, energetic beings. My friends, what I concluded from these three experiences, as well as my own experience. And if you want to hear that experience, go to my website and listen to the EFT tapping videos. Was that the very operating system for who we are, the very computer program, if you want to think about it that way, that tells our bodies what to do, whether that is a cancer diagnosis or an emotional problem, or our body doing paradoxical things that it's not supposed to do, based on the emotional conditions of that person and what they're experiencing in this world, is massive. Well, guess what? Now we understand it's there. And guess what? Now we have tools to help people manipulate it. And guess what? Now we also understand some of the rules, the patterns, and the characteristics of emotions because it has its own language. And what you say first, how you think about things, is massively important. If you say, I am a body with a soul, you can say that. But what you say first in the language of emotion is what you believe is most important. And when you say, I am a body with a soul, you're saying, I'm first a piece of meat. And somewhere in there, there's a spirit or a soul. You can do that because you also, as a human being, have the right to experience life exactly the way you want to experience it. It's called free will. And if you want to put your underwear on the outside of your pants and walk around like that for hundreds or even thousands of years as human beings, you can do that. And as long as we refer to ourselves as a body with a soul, it is just like putting your underwear on the outside of your pants and walking around looking just like everybody else. And the second that you stop and put your underwear on first and your pants over the top of it, you realize, oh my gosh, this just feels better. And you'd be right. But the second you walk outside with your pants on the outside and your underwear on the inside, and everybody else is walking around with their underwear on the outside of their pants, what do you think they're going to say? They're going to start pointing the finger at you saying, weirdo, everybody knows you put your underwear on the outside of your pants. That, my friends, is exactly the world that we live in. We've all been walking around with our underwear on the outside of our pants for so long, we think that's the way it's supposed to be. But when you put your underwear on first and you recognize that you are a spirit having a human experience, you are an energetic spiritual being wearing a meat suit, for crying out loud. And when you address yourself as a being of energy, of emotion, of spirit first, and a body second, now you've got things coming your direction. Now you are speaking the language of your body, your mind, your soul. That is the natural language of human beings. And that, my friends, is where the magic to unlock a life you love lives. This is my message. This is the heart and the soul of everything that we're trying to do here, folks, is to try and show you that who you really are, the most powerful part of who you are, is not a piece of meat. And as long as we continue to treat people, to treat human beings as if they were a piece of meat in medicine, we will continue to fail. It's not that we don't have wins. We absolutely have wins in medicine. But when we treat human beings as if they were energetic, emotional, spiritual beings first, living inside of a meat suit, the entire world changes in a second. And all of a sudden, miracles aren't miracles and magic isn't magic. It is simply the practical understanding of the way things really are. And you, my friend, are not a body with a soul. You are a spirit, an energetic being living inside of a piece of meat. And when you address yourself as a spirit, That is the moment that magic and miracles become a matter of understanding and not magic and miracles. Listen, I can sit here and talk to you guys about this all day long. I promise to keep these relatively short, and I've already run over time today. If you'd like to learn more about how you can start addressing yourself as an emotional, energetic, spiritual being, go to the front page of my website. It's www.docofunlock.com. It's docofunlock.com, and watch the videos that are there. There's a program there on getting moving beyond pain. There's another one about EFT tapping, and I also go into the full story of my cancer patient and how he created an entirely new reality for 35 years before I met him, using the power of our language of emotion. There's a lot to learn. It's a big topic, but I just wanted to share some of those stories with you today, and get the conversation started about how unbelievably powerful you are, and how you too, my friend, can unlock a life you love. Showing you how to unlock unbelievable emotional well-being and flourishing good health. My name's Dr. Tim Teel. I am the Doc of Unlock. We'll talk to you guys next time. Thanks for watching.